"Name your price," they said. The Iron Duke of Veldrath named it before the room could breathe. They said Lord Harwick Veldrath never attended the marriage auctions. I know this because I attended them myself, twice, in the company of men I once called friends, and in all those years of whispered bids and gloved cruelty, I never once saw the Iron Duke darken that particular door. He had no need of such markets. Women of fortune were pressed upon him at every assembly, every supper, every charitable concert the county could contrive. Veldrath did not browse. Veldrath chose when he chose at all, and in 34 years he had chosen no one. So when he walked through the double doors of Pembury Hall on the 14th of November, I nearly overturned my wine. He did not announce himself. He never did. The room simply altered, the way a fire alters a cold room, not by declaration, but by presence. Conversations faltered. Lorgnettes lifted. Lord Ashby, mid-sentence beside me, lost the thread entirely and did not notice. I found him at once, and I found, following the line of his gaze, the young woman standing beside the registry table. She was not what this room expected. She wore a dress that had been pressed within an inch of its life, pale gray, the lace at the collar mended so neatly you had to look twice to find it. She carried no fan. She did not smile. She stood with her hands folded at her waist, and her eyes directed precisely nowhere, the careful posture of a woman who has decided that dignity costs nothing and will surrender none of it. Her hair was dark. Her face was composed into something so deliberate it nearly looked like calm. It was not calm. I had known enough grief in my own life to recognize it behind a steady jaw. Her name, I would learn, was Miss Constance Peel. Her father, Mr. Edmund Peel, had died 4 months prior, leaving behind him a house with a mortgage he had concealed from his family, 2 younger sisters, an elderly mother, and debts that had outpaced his assets by the time the solicitors were done counting. The creditors had been patient for precisely 3 months. They were patient no longer. The marriage auction at Pembury Hall was not, strictly speaking, legal. It operated through the polite fiction of an estate introduction registry, in which a family in distress might register a daughter of marriageable age, and interested gentlemen of means might make introductory settlements, which is to say, bids for the privilege of an arrangement. The settlement went to the creditors. The daughter went to the highest bidder. Everyone involved understood this perfectly. No one said it plainly. Miss Constance Peel had not been consulted. She had simply been told the evening prior that the house would be taken in a fortnight unless an arrangement was reached, and that an arrangement had been found. She was given the gray dress and brought here. I knew this because I arrived early and I saw her speak with the registry clerk. I could not hear the words, but I saw the moment she understood the very small, very controlled way her chin lifted, and I thought then that she was either the bravest person in the room or the most determined not to break in public. Perhaps both. Veldrath watched her for 3 minutes before he spoke to anyone. I timed it because I was watching him. Then he crossed the room toward me. "Cavanhill," he said. "Veldrath," I kept my voice easy. "I confess I did not expect you." No, he did not look at me. He was still watching Miss Peel across the room, where a man I recognized as Sir Fordham Gretch was now circling her with the studied interest of a man assessing livestock. "Who is she?" "Miss Peel. Edmund Peel's eldest." I told him the rest of it briefly. The mortgage, the sisters, the 3 months. He was quiet for a moment. Gretch had said something to Miss Peel. She answered him with 2 words, and he laughed in the way men laugh when a woman says something he finds charming precisely because he does not expect her to have the wit. She did not smile back. "What does Gretch want her for?" Veldrath said. "The usual reasons a man like Gretch attends these things," I said. "A docile hostess for his table and someone who won't cost him sleep." "He'll find neither." I looked at him. "You've spoken 4 words to her." "I haven't needed to speak with her." He set down his glass. "What is the opening figure?" I told him. He said nothing for a moment. "Then walk with me." We moved to the far end of the room, where the registry table stood on a raised dais, and Mr. Callow, the clerk who managed these arrangements, was reviewing his papers with the expression of a man who has long since made his peace with distasteful work. "Callow," Veldrath said. Callow looked up. His face did what most faces did when Veldrath addressed them directly. It rearranged itself into a kind of careful neutrality. "Your Grace." "Miss Peel's settlement. What is the sum required to discharge the Peel estate's obligations in full, mortgage, creditors, all of it?" Callow blinked. Your Grace, the figure for the introductory settlement is. That is not what I asked. Veldrath's voice was very quiet. In my experience, the quieter he became, the less room there was for misunderstanding. The full figure, every obligation, the house preserved, the sisters provided for, the mother kept in her own rooms. What does that require? Callow named the number. It was not a small number. Veldrath said, double it. The room had not been listening, precisely. But rooms like this one have excellent peripheral hearing, and by the time those 2 words landed, a very specific quality of silence had spread outward from the dais like a stone dropped in still water. Gretch, who had been approaching the table from the other direction, stopped walking. Your Grace, Callow said carefully, I am not certain I. Double it, Veldrath said again. The full sum doubled. The excess is a settlement for the family, held in trust by whichever solicitor Miss Peel names. Not mine, hers. He paused. Is there any part of that instruction that is unclear? No, Your Grace. Good, he turned. He looked across the room directly at Miss Constance Peel. She was already looking at him. She had, I think, been watching him since he approached the dais, not with hope, which would have been too much to sustain, but with that same precise, careful attention she had given everything else in this room. Measuring, preparing for whatever came next. He crossed the floor to her. The room watched, I watched. He stopped before her and inclined his head in a bow that was, by any standard of the period, a degree of deference that no one in Pembury Hall expected to see from Lord Harwick Veldrath, directed at a debtor's daughter in a mendied dress. Miss Peel, he said. Your Grace, her voice was steady. I will give her that, in a room full of people watching her as though she were a figure on a stage, her voice was entirely, remarkably steady. I owe you an apology, he said. She blinked. It was the first unguarded thing I saw her do. I beg your pardon. I should have made my intentions known before Callow announced the settlement. That was poor form. He paused. I am not accustomed to these proceedings. I was deciding as I went. Deciding, she repeated, as though she were testing the shape of the word. Whether you would prefer I negotiate the matter of an introduction separately, privately, with a period of acquaintance first, or whether the settlement should simply be made unconditional, the family's debts discharged, no arrangement required. She was very still. You would do that? I am doing that. The only question is whether you would prefer the other option as well in time. The other option, she said slowly, being an introduction. Yes, he held her gaze. I am told, not easy company. I am further told I am not a man women find it comfortable to be around for extended periods. I think that is probably fair. He glanced once, briefly, toward Gretch, who was still standing at a distance with the look of a man who has been made very suddenly aware of his own smallness. I cannot offer you comfort in advance. I can offer you honesty. I will not make you feel like a figure in a registry. The silence around them was complete now. Gretch had developed a profound interest in the wallpaper. Callow was writing something with great concentration. The rest of the room had the particular stillness of people trying very hard to appear as though they are not witnessing anything significant. Miss Peel looked at him for a long moment. You are the Iron Duke, she said at last. People call me that. Do you mind it? No, he considered. I have minded worse things. Something shifted in her face then, not quite softening, but something like the moment before a door opens, when the hinges begin very slightly to move. You said you are not easy company. That is accurate. Are you honest? Always to a fault most find. I do not find it a fault, she looked at him steadily. I have had of late rather too much of the other kind. He said nothing, but something in his shoulders, something I had known for 20 years and rarely seen shift, eased by a very small degree. I would prefer the introduction, Miss Peel said, if it is still offered. It is. Then I accept. I will not pretend the months that followed were simple. Veldrath was, as he had warned, not easy company. He was a man of few social graces and considerable opinions, and he had spent 34 years answering to no one, which tends to produce a person of strong habit. He did not make idle conversation. He did not flatter. At their first dinner, arranged through me, at Veldrath's insistence that there be a witness, he told her directly that he had made inquiries about her family's situation, that the solicitor managing the trust was one he trusted himself, and that he wanted her to know the arrangement would stand regardless of whatever else transpired between them. She looked at him across the table and said, "Why?" "Because you should not have to wonder. Most men in your position would use it as leverage," she said. "I am aware," he picked up his fork. "I am not most men." "No," she said after a moment, "I am beginning to see that." She was not grateful in the pliant way some men seem to want. She was grateful in the particular way of someone who has learned to value a thing because they know what its absence costs, quietly, without performance, in small moments that were not for show. She thanked him once for what he had done, directly and without ceremony, and then never spoke of it again. He seemed to understand this was the right way to receive it. He was, beneath the iron exterior the world had built around him, a man who understood what it meant to carry something without speaking of it. They argued, not viciously, she was not that kind of woman, and whatever reputation Veldrath had, he was not a bully. But she was sharp, and she was unwilling to be nodded past, and twice in the early months she said something that stopped him mid-sentence and made him think. He told me afterward, on one of our rides, that this was not something he had expected. "Expected from her specifically?" I asked. "Expected from anyone," he said. "I have not been contradicted in some time." And he was quiet for a moment. "It is not unpleasant." By December, they had settled into a rhythm of correspondence that supplemented the fortnightly dinners. Her letters were precise. She had a good mind and no patience for circumlocution, and his, which I saw once by accident and which he did not ask me to return, were longer than I would have anticipated. He wrote like a man who had a great deal stored up, and had simply never found anyone worth the effort of retrieving it. By February, he had told her about the death of his brother, which he had told no one, including me. By March, she had told him about the morning she had stood in her father's study and found the first creditor's letter hidden in a book, and understood, with that particular cold clarity that comes before grief, that the man she had trusted had been hiding a ruin from her for 3 years. "What did you do?" he asked her. They were walking in the gardens of Veldrath Park. I was trailing them at a suitable distance because I had been invited and then comprehensively forgotten. "I put the letter back," she said. "Then I went and sat with my mother and told her the garden looked well. Then I found the solicitor's directory and made a list." She paused. "There was not very much else to do." "No," he said, "there rarely is." "You sound as though you know." "My father," he said, and did not elaborate further. She did not press. That was, I think, the moment. Not the auction, not the December letters, not the February confession. The moment in the garden where she did not press, and he understood that she understood that some things are carried in the carrying and need not be put into words. He proposed on the 4th of April in his library, because they were both looking at the same shelf of books, and he had run out of patience with himself. "I am aware," he said, "that this is not a conventional declaration." "I am not certain you are capable of a conventional declaration," she said, which was accurate. "Probably not." He looked at the shelf rather than at her. "I have been told I am not the sort of man women find romantic." "Who told you that?" "Various people over various years." "Were they right?" He turned then and looked at her. "I don't know," he said. "I have not tried before." She looked back at him for a long moment. He was, I imagine, a formidable thing to look at directly, all that accumulated solitude and restraint, and underneath it the very careful, very serious attention he had been turning on her for 5 months like a man who has finally found a problem worth solving. "I think," she said at last, "that the person who is romantic is not the person who says the most elaborate things. It is the person who means what they say." "I will always mean what I say." "I know," she looked at the shelf again. "Yes. Yes. Yes," she said, "I will marry you." He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said, very quietly. And then, because he was Veldrath, and had never in his life done the expected thing, he did not embrace her or take her hand. He simply turned back to the shelf and removed the book they had both been reaching for and handed it to her. She took it. She smiled, not the careful, controlled expression she had worn in Pembury Hall, but the real one, small and quick and entirely her own. "I know because I saw it from the doorway. I had come to announce that dinner was ready. I did not announce it for another quarter hour." The wedding was held in May at Veldrath Park, without the audience that Pembury Hall had provided. There were those, of course, who had opinions. Sir Gretch, whose own bid at the registry that November had come to nothing, was heard to remark at several suppers that the Iron Duke had lost his reason. Lady Pembury, who hosted the registry and had known Veldrath's family for 30 years, said she could not imagine what had possessed him, given all the suitable women who had tried for so long. Lord Ashby, who had been standing beside me that first evening, told me privately that he thought Veldrath had done something rather fine, and immediately swore me to silence about it. I was not silent about it, I am telling you now. What I remember most from the day itself is not the ceremony, which was brief and quiet, and attended by perhaps 40 people, but the moment after, when they came back down the aisle together and Veldrath turned to look at her, and I saw on his face something I had not seen in 20 years of friendship. He looked, for the first time I could recall, like a man who had arrived somewhere. Miss Constance Peel, Mrs. Constance Veldrath, as of that May morning, looked at him with the same steady composure she had carried since Pembury Hall, and then she said something to him quietly that I could not hear. Whatever it was, he laughed. I do not mean the polite, brief acknowledgement that passed for laughter in ballrooms. I mean a real one, unexpected, unguarded, the kind that arrives before a man knows to hold it back. He covered it almost immediately, but I saw it. Lord Ashby beside me went very still. Then he said under his breath, "Well." "Yes," I said. "I did not know he could do that." "Nor did I said. The guests moved on to the wedding breakfast. The two of them stood a moment longer in the doorway, not speaking, not making any display of it, simply standing together in the ordinary way of people who have decided that where the other one is, that is where they are. Then she said something else to him, and he offered her his arm, and they walked in. That was how it was. I have attended a great many weddings in my time. I have seen arrangements made into affection, and affection made into arrangements, and I have seen the whole range of things that pass between people who have been placed together by circumstance and told to make the best of it. I have not often seen what I saw that morning. What I saw was a man who had been called the Iron Duke for so long that most people had stopped looking for whatever it was the iron was protecting, and a woman who had stood in a room full of men deciding her worth and kept her chin level and her hands folded and gave nothing away, and had the patience, afterward, to look past what the world had made of him and find the thing underneath. They did not need rescuing from each other. They found each other quite thoroughly on their own. The rest of us simply had the privilege of watching,